All right, ladies and gentlemen. My apologies if I seem a little awkward for our very first video together. As I start to get used to where everything's located at here at UHS and where everything's located at in the kitchen, I'll definitely look a little bit more comfortable. So right now, while I'm getting used to things, my apologies if it kind of takes me a minute to find where everything is at. So, the game plan today for our culinary arts class, we are talking about cooking techniques, right? And we are practicing not one but two recipes with two different cooking techniques. So the very first recipe that we are going to start off with is our broiled balsamic roasted vegetables. We are then going to go ahead and make a pan-fried pork schnitzel. The reason I'm having us start off with the broiled balsamic roasted vegetables is because as you read through the recipe, you'll see that our vegetables actually need to marinate for a little bit before we cook them. The reason we marinate the vegetables ahead of time is so they can go ahead and start absorbing all those flavors, all those wonderful flavors, and this sauce that we've created for them, and this marinade that we've created for them. So what I'm gonna go ahead and do is I'm gonna show you both recipes within the same video today. And we're gonna start off with the broiled balsamic roasted vegetables. When we get to the pork schnitzel, I'll make sure and I'll stop and we'll read through the pork schnitzel recipe. But right off the bat, we're gonna start off with our broiled balsamic roasted vegetables. So that first cooking technique we're gonna start off with is broiling. And as I mentioned in class, broiling is where you are cooking a food item, in this case our vegetables, directly under some sort of heat source. All of your ovens, in theory, should have a broiling function, but depending on your oven, your broiler could be located in a lot of different places. So for example, I'll go ahead and I'll show you real quick. We have electric stoves here, electric ranges here at UHS. So here at Urbana High School. These are all electric. Some of the newer electric models, when you go and you take a look at your oven, will have this broiler setting here. This one has both a high and a low setting. I'm gonna start off broiling our vegetables on low when we get to it. The reason being is that I don't know enough about these ovens to know if I start my broiler on high, I might end up burning my vegetables instead of giving them that nice kind of crisp, charred outside coating that I'm looking for. So my recommendation, if you're not familiar with your broiler, I would start off with a low setting, okay? For a lot of electric stoves, electric ranges, you have some that look like this with the spiral tops, and you have some that have this like lovely flat glass top. Okay. With the electric ranges, it is very common that when you hit that broiler setting, what that will do is inside your oven, it will turn this heating element on right up here. Okay. And so your direct heat source will be right up here. And what you'll need to do is that you'll have your rack, your oven rack, up towards the top. You'll put your baking sheet with your veggies on it, and you'll broil your veggies up here. To me, because I'm not familiar with this oven, I probably wouldn't put this rack here at the very, very top. I would probably move it to the second spot here. Okay? Because to me, that is very, very close to that heating element, that heat source. That is very, very close to that heating element, that heat source. And I'd be concerned, since I'm not familiar with this oven, I might potentially burn your veggies. Our ovens here at the school, it looks like we have a heating element here at the top, and we also have one at the bottom. So whenever we're baking things, both of these will turn bright red. Okay, and both of them will turn on, and you'll get heat from both sides of your oven. But when you're using that broiling function, a lot of times in your oven, it's just gonna be that top spot there. Now, some ovens, especially if you have a gas oven or a gas range, so if yours is gas and not electric, some will have a broiler down here at the bottom in this drawer. And I believe I'm gonna have to double check when we get ready to get started. This to me looks more like just a drawer. Okay, this does not look like a broiler. Some ovens will have a drawer under here where you can store different baking sheets and things. Others have broilers down there. And so if I remember, I'll try to show you a quick snapshot of my gas oven at home and show you the broiler I have at home. Okay? So I will try to do that when I get home today. So when you go to actually cook your veggies, you're gonna have to kind of play around with your oven and do some exploring if you're not familiar with the broiler function of it. And you may have to ask your parents about it if they've ever used it before. Like I said, some of them, it's gonna be, you're gonna have it in the oven, and it's gonna be up there at the very top, and you're gonna put everything in the actual normal compartment that you bake your food in. Others are gonna have that drawer down there at the bottom. So for this recipe, our broiled balsamic veggies, it says the prep time is 30 minutes, the cook time is 10 minutes, and so the total time is 40 minutes. And this recipe is available to you on Google Classroom. The reason that your prep time is 30 minutes is, like I said, we're gonna marinate our vegetables. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and put everything together. Shouldn't take us very long, and then we're gonna have to let it set for a little while. So, reading through our ingredients, we have our balsamic marinade, and we have our vegetables. Okay, there we go. Our balsamic marinade has 1 tablespoon of olive oil, 2 tablespoons of balsamic vinegar, 1 garlic clove that's minced, a tablespoon of brown sugar, a tablespoon of soy sauce, 1.5 teaspoons of Dijon mustard, and some freshly cracked black pepper. Our vegetables. We're gonna use roughly 4 ounces of button mushrooms, half a green bell pepper, half a zucchini, 2 ounces of grape tomatoes, and half of a yellow or red onion. I chose a red onion for this recipe because I really enjoy roasted, broiled red onions and the flavor of red onions, especially when I am making a medley of different veggies. For this recipe, the nice thing about it is that if there's a vegetable in here that you don't care for, you could leave it out. Or if there's some vegetables that you make or grow yourself, maybe in the summertime, that you have at home, you could substitute one of those instead. So say you don't have any zucchini right now, but you have like a yellow squash, you could always use yellow squash. Or if you don't like tomatoes, you could always leave the tomatoes out. Or if you had some sort of other squash or another kind of onion or another type of tomato that you wanted to use instead of mushrooms, if you don't like mushrooms, you could easily substitute that for your mushrooms. You also don't have to use green bell pepper. You can use any kind of bell pepper you want. So this recipe is very versatile, and it's really easy to substitute other veggies as you prefer them. So I am going to go ahead, and for my directions, it says in a small bowl, I'm going to stir together my ingredients for my balsamic marinade. That's my olive oil, my balsamic vinegar, my garlic, my brown sugar, my zucchini. Oh goodness, sorry. My brown sugar, my soy sauce, and my Dijon mustard, along with some freshly cracked black pepper. So I'm gonna go ahead, like I said, Miss Libby and Miss Yolanda were oh so kind and measured everything out for me ahead of time, which is wonderful. It's gonna be a huge time saver, but it is gonna take me a second just to get all this in here. Sugar, my Dijon, get all this stuff cleaned up. Okay, part of the reason I chose this recipe for us to prepare is the fact that when I was working in the restaurant, so when I was working at the bread company, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the bread company on Goodwin Avenue, we used to make some balsamic roasted vegetables at night. And rather than making a marinade just like this, what we did is that we had a homemade balsamic vinaigrette that we would prepare, and we toss our vegetables on that. And we used, I'm trying to think, we typically had zucchini, squash, carrots, red onions, broccoli, a lot of times. We had a bunch of lovely, more wintry vegetables, but we had them year round. But it had a lot of these similar ingredients in it. And if we had more time, and if we were in person, I'd have us make a homemade balsamic vinaigrette, so an actual homemade balsamic dressing. That way we could taste test it, not just on our vegetables, but also on like a salad or something that we prepared in class. But for now, rather than making our own dressing, that's the same as that one, this one should work just as good. And I think that this one you might actually enjoy a little bit more because we've added brown sugar to it. So it adds a little bit. The balsamic vinegar can be very acidic, and not everyone is a fan of that acidicness, that acid, that flavor. So the nice thing about adding that brown sugar is that adds a little bit of sweetness to your balsamic vinaigrette, to this marinade, and kind of helps balance those flavor profiles. So that sweetness kind of balances out the acidic taste. Okay. All right, so I've got my olive oil, my balsamic vinegar, my brown sugar, my soy sauce, my Dijon mustard. The only thing I'm missing is my freshly cracked black pepper, which I will find in here in just a moment, and my garlic. So this is culinary arts. I'm going to assume that you are all very familiar with using a knife and using a proper knife skills. That being said, I am going to go ahead and review some things with you, just as a little refresher. So this is, let me see, a clove of garlic. When you go to the grocery store, you're typically going to buy a whole head of garlic. This recipe only calls for 1 clove of garlic for your balsamic roasted veggies. I am a big fan of garlic. If you decide you get home and you want to add more garlic to your marinade, you're more than welcome to. But this right here, this is 1 single clove. Okay, this is 1 single clove of garlic. When you pull the single clove of garlic off of the whole head of garlic, it does have this outside peel that has to come off. Rather than trying to sit here and like pull it off myself to peel it, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lay my garlic clove flat on my cutting board. It's nice and clean. Take the flat portion of my knife, gently lay it on my clove of garlic, and take the palm of my hand and smash it down. Okay, so I'm gonna quickly hit down, keeping my fingers back so I don't accidentally get them underneath my knife, and smash my clove of garlic so I can peel it a little bit easier. Just like that. You can see the garlic clove smashed, and I can easily just peel this off now. Just like that. Now mincing. Okay, got a little bad spot there. I'm gonna cut off really quick. Mincing. It's that smaller form of dicing, right? I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna cut my garlic. I'm gonna keep my fingers curled back the best I can. With garlic, it's a little challenging. I'm gonna keep my fingers curled back. Cutting my garlic into strips. Cutting into a small dice of sorts. Like I said, keeping my fingers curled back. As I've got it kind of in that dice, I'm gonna start moving my knife back and forth and getting it into smaller and smaller pieces. Okay? When I'm doing this, I'm using my thumb and my pointer finger to hold either right here beside the edge of the blade, or actually on the edge of the blade, whatever you're comfortable with, and I'm just wrapping the remainder of my fingers around. Okay, so I can do that use that rocking motion and just use my wrist. I'm not chopping down with the knife, I'm rocking. All right? To mince my garlic, I'm gonna take my hands here and I'm gonna start rocking my knife back and forth. I'm gonna use my fingers and just gently press my fingers down on the tip of the knife. I'm not pressing down really hard. All I'm doing is holding my knife steady while I am mincing my garlic. like I said, this is not the knife that I am super familiar with. We've got a couple knives, there's many different types of chef's knives out there, and it looks like a lot of the ones we have here are closer to that 9 to 10 inches, and I prefer a chef knife that's a little bit shorter, just personal preference. I think it's a little bit easier to maneuver, at least for me. Okay. So if I look a little awkward, that is why. All right. So my garlic. It's a good little mince for me. If you want it smaller than this, you are more than welcome to mince your garlic even smaller. That to me, that'll be good enough. That's a small enough for me for just a marinade. So I'm gonna go ahead, add the garlic to my lovely little marinade. And this is what my marinade looks like so far. So, now that I've added all my marinated ingredients into a bowl, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna cut up my mushrooms, bell peppers, zucchini, and onion. This says that our recipe, we should cut everything up into about 1-inch cubes. All right, we should cut everything up into about 1-inch cubes. I am not necessarily going to cut them up into cubes. What I am going to do is I'm going to make sure that all of my pieces of all of my veggies are roughly the same size. So for our grape tomatoes, it says we should leave them whole. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep one of these grape tomatoes out, and I'm going to put the rest of these in my bowl here. All of my veggies have been pre-washed for me, so they're good to go as is. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep one of these grape tomatoes out because I'm going to use this as a size reference. I want to make sure that all of my vegetables are roughly the same size. The reason being is that when I cook all of these together, I want to make sure that all of my vegetables are going to cook evenly at the same time. If I cut these up into different sizes, I'm gonna have some vegetables that cook really quickly, and I'm gonna have others that are gonna take a little bit longer to cook. And then I'm gonna have the issue where some of my vegetables are gonna be done after 5 minutes, and other ones are gonna need another like 2 or 3 minutes to go. And so I'll either have vegetables that are burnt or I'll have vegetables that are underdone. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my tomato and use this as a size reference just off here to the side. And I think what I'm gonna do for my cucumbers, or not my cucumbers, my zucchini, my goodness. You have a couple different options. You are more than welcome. This is a small zucchini. Okay, it's pretty small. All right? If you wanted to, you could cut this into coins. And that would still be roughly the same size of my grape tomato. But I think what I'm gonna do, to make the zucchini a little bit more stable, I'm gonna go ahead and cut it in half. Using that rocking motion, holding the zucchini on either side with my knife, cut it in half. And then I'm gonna cut them into like little half circles. All right, that's what I'm gonna do. So once again, keep my fingers curled back. I'm gonna cut these into about 1/2 inch, probably about 1/2 inch in thickness. If I cut them too thick, same thing. I'm gonna have issues where things aren't cooking at the same time. So I'm gonna keep them roughly about 1/2 inch apart. Okay. All right, so that's what they kind of look like. And if you can compare, the reason I keep looking down is because I have my cell phone over here. I am currently using a GoPro to record myself. And the nice thing about the GoPro is that it will connect straight to my phone, so I can actually like see what I'm doing. Alrighty. Okay. My mushrooms. my mushrooms. I'm gonna once again kind of take one of my grape tomatoes, take a look. Put these into just little slices. Same thing. About the same size. Okay. I'll be honest, I am not a huge mushroom person, but my husband absolutely loves them, so he'll be really excited to eat these when I'm done with them. Like I said, mushrooms are a little bit trickier to cut. I'm gonna do my best to keep my fingers back, but because of their shape, they kind of like to roll around a little bit. And that just happens. Okay, but these button mushrooms, cutting these into thirds, totally works. When you're making this at home, if you have a zucchini that's kind of small like this one, you are more than welcome to use your whole zucchini instead of just half a zucchini. Because if you look, I got quite a few mushrooms in this. And if you're not a fan of mushrooms, you do not have to put as many mushrooms in this recipe as I did. The great thing, like I said, about this recipe is you're able to kind of change things up as needed. So if you don't like mushrooms, you're more than welcome to add extra bell pepper or extra zucchini or extra whatever. Okay? Which actually, I am missing my bell pepper, so I'm gonna be right back. I'm gonna go grab the bell pepper real quick. All right, got my lovely bell pepper. Okay. My bell pepper. Okay, it's already been cut in half for me. Like I said, if you want to make more veggies, you're more than welcome to double this recipe. So you're using a whole zucchini, a whole bell pepper, a whole onion. That's perfectly fine. You'll just have to make sure to increase your marinade as well. For my bell pepper, I think I'm going to cut these into julienne strips and then cut those strips in half. Okay? Before I do that though, it's kind of, my bell pepper is not laying very flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and cut off this bottom part here. That way, my pepper will go ahead and lay flat for me, or a little bit flatter, at least. Right. Cut these into strips. Keeping my fingers curled back. And actually, these are fairly small. If I cut these in half, they're going to be teeny tiny. So I'm going to leave these as is. But if you have a great big bell pepper, I'd suggest maybe cutting these in half. But these are going to be teeny tiny if I try to cut these in half. So go ahead, throw those in there. I don't want to waste food, so I'm going to go ahead and try to cut these into strips as well. This one I will cut in half. This one I will cut in half. Awesome. Okay. My onion. This has already been cut in half for me, which is awesome, but I still need to peel it. What I like to do, I want to make sure I keep my root end intact. That way my onion stays together. But I'm going to go ahead and cut off the non-root end. And that'll make things a little bit easier for me to peel. And it'll pull that right off. And my onion stays together because that root is still together. For your onion, You're more than welcome to dice your onion, or you're more than welcome to cut your onion into strips as well. I think I'm gonna go ahead and cut mine into some strips of sorts. Okay. I'm gonna cut mine a little bit thicker, so rather than having really thin slices, I'm gonna cut these in a little bit thicker slices. And then potentially cut some of these slices in half, so they're all about the same size. Challenging for you guys to see. Okay. That way I have some pretty big pieces of onion. And this way, if somebody doesn't like onion, it's a little bit easier for them to pick out. So like I said, a little bit thicker in size. I'm gonna cut that in half. And I get some onion pieces that look kind of like this. Okay. And these will be similar size to my bell pepper. So they'll cook all roughly about the same time. Awesome. Okay. So at this point, I've cut all my mushrooms, my bell peppers, my zucchini, everything in there. Okay. Got everything in here. I've got my marinade over here. It says that I'm gonna go ahead and put everything into a bag, a gallon-sized Ziploc baggie, pour my marinade on top, and let everything start to marinate for about 30 minutes. While you are letting this marinate, that's when you're gonna go ahead and start on your pork schnitzel. So like I said, this whole process should not take you very long. The only reason it's taken me so long is because I'm explaining everything as I am doing it. So I'm gonna go ahead, put all my wonderful, colorful veggies together in the bag here. I've turned down the edges of the bag, that way it's a little bit easier for me to get everything in there. I'm gonna pour my lovely marinade on top, making sure I mix it all together before I pour it in there. That way I don't miss anything. And when I zip this shut, I'm gonna leave a little bit of air in here. That way I can move my veggies around every so often. It says that we're gonna let the marinade sit for about 30 minutes at room temperature. So just out as it is. If for some reason you wanna start this process but not actually finish cooking everything until a little bit later, you could let this sit in the fridge overnight. That marinade should get a little bit of a stronger flavor. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. This is something that you should be able to, within 30 minutes to an hour, it should be good to go. But if you maybe even started this first thing in the morning and then came back to it that night, it should be okay. As long as you put it in the fridge. If you're gonna cook them right away, I would suggest going ahead and leaving them out like I am today. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna let these marinate for about 30 minutes. As you can see, I've mixed up my bag, got everything nice and coated there. Got that marinade all there. And I'm gonna go ahead and get started on my pork schnitzel. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I am back. We've been letting our balsamic roasted vegetables marinate for a little bit. We're gonna continue letting them marinate, and we're gonna start working on our pork schnitzel. So as I mentioned, the second cooking technique that we're gonna be practicing is pan frying. So pan frying is when you're using a very little bit of oil in a skillet of some sort, or some sort of a frying pan. So I'll show you here in a little bit how much oil I'm talking about. For right now, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna take a look at our pork schnitzel recipe. Pork schnitzel. I've already had a couple of you ask me about this. Pork schnitzel is a classic German recipe. However, there's a lot of different countries that have similar recipes. If you do not eat pork, there's a lot of people that don't eat pork. You're more than welcome to substitute some sort of chicken or poultry, or I've seen people also substitute like a veal or cube steak, and you can make a very similar recipe. All right, My recommendation, if you don't eat pork, but you do eat chicken, I would go ahead and use a boneless chicken breast as a substitute for this recipe. This recipe calls for 2 boneless pork chops. If you're making this for your whole family, feel free to double it and make at least 4 or more. If you do that, you'll just have to increase all of your other ingredients as well. So this recipe calls for 2 boneless pork chops. We want the thinner cut pork chops. The reason being is that we are going to flatten these out even thinner to cook them. That way they cook very quickly and evenly. And the thinner the pork chop, the easier it is going to be to flatten it out to that thickness that we're looking for. It also calls for about 10 saltine crackers. My recommendation, you might end up using more than 10 saltine crackers, and that's okay, especially if you are making more than 2 pork chops. So you want roughly 10 saltine crackers. It calls for half an egg, lightly beaten. If we were here in class in person, I would have us share an egg. However, since you're at home, you're more than welcome to use 1 whole egg. That way you don't have to worry about being short on egg when you go to coat your pork chops. You're gonna have a little bit of black pepper to taste. It says you need 2 tablespoons of olive oil divided. And I did make a note that you might need more for cooking. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. Depending on how your pork chops are cooking, you might end up using more or less olive oil. You want the juice of half a lemon, about 2 tablespoons of chicken broth, 1 tablespoon of butter, and 1 teaspoon or 1 clove of minced garlic. So really up to personal preference, up to you. Once again, I really like garlic, and so I always opt for more whenever possible. So it starts off on a recipe, says we want to preheat our oven at 200 degrees Fahrenheit. This step right here in our recipe, okay, that preheating your oven, if you're making multiple pork chops besides just the 2, this step is to help you keep your pork chops warm in the oven. My recommendation, if you're making your veggies at the same time, don't worry about preheating your oven. Your pork chops will not be sitting long enough in between cook times for them to get really, really cold. So it'll be okay if you don't do that step. We're then gonna trim the fat off of your pork chop. And I'll be honest, my pork chops today, they're not very fatty. But if you have fatty pork chops, you're gonna try to trim some of that fat off. Then it says you wanna lay a sheet of plastic wrap across the counter and place the pork chop on top. Cover with another sheet of plastic wrap and turn up all the edges. Pound with a heavy pan or the smooth side of a meat mallet until very thin. Okay? So, once again, like I said, if you see me looking down, it's because I'm looking at my phone. As I mentioned, my pork chops, I already have very thin pork chops, okay? And my pork chops don't really have a lot of fat on them. If I wanted to, I could go ahead and finish cutting off that white bit there, that fat right there. I'm gonna go ahead and leave it on. That fat does add some extra flavor. It helps make sure your pork chop is not super dried out. Kind of helps with that moisture. But if I wanted to, I could cut that off. If you have more fat on your pork chop than what I am showing you, I highly recommend you go ahead and cut that off. But I just have a little bit here on the outside edges. I'm not super concerned about that, so I'm gonna go ahead and leave it on there. Now, if you have a meat mallet at home, you're gonna use the smooth side, not the rough side. This side is used to tenderize meat. If you use this side, it's gonna poke holes in your plastic wrap. This side, the flat side, the smooth side, is used to flatten your meat. It also will tenderize it in the process, but we want this side to help flatten our pork chop. If you do not have a meat mallet at home, you are more than welcome. Double check with your parents to see what they want you to do. If you don't have a meat mallet, you can use a flat pan and flatten out your pork chops that way, using the flat end of that flat side of your pan. If you want, you could also use a rolling pin. I wouldn't suggest it because you might damage your rolling pin. I would suggest using some sort of skillet, some sort of other heavy pan instead first. But please double check with your parents to make sure that you're not using a pan that maybe they don't want you to use, or using the rolling pin when they didn't want you to use the rolling pin, okay? So please double check with them to see what they're okay with you using to help flatten your pork chop. If you don't have a heavy pan, if you don't have a meat mallet, if you don't have a rolling pin, you can always get creative and use something like a canned good, like a heavy can of soup or something, or a heavy can of tomatoes to try to flatten out your meat. This is why it's so important to go ahead and buy the thinly cut pork chops to begin with, because then it's gonna take you less time and less effort to flatten them out. So, if you've noticed, your recipe says to use plastic wrap, and I have this Ziploc baggie here, right? I got my pork chops in a Ziploc baggie. If you don't wanna use plastic wrap, you're more than welcome to use plastic wrap. Plastic wrap tends to be a pain in the butt though, and doesn't always do what you want it to do. So rather than using plastic wrap, I'm gonna take a gallon-sized Ziploc baggie, put my pork chops in it, and I'm gonna use this to flatten my pork chops out. And so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take the flat end of my meat mallet and start flattening them out, okay? I want them both to be roughly about the same size, and when I'm flattening my pork chop out, I wanna make sure that all sides of my pork chop are roughly the same, because if they're not, then I'm gonna have issues with one side of my pork cooking faster than the other. So I'm gonna go ahead and start flattening it out, keeping my fingers back. Get those nice and thin. Okay. I will point this out. Okay? Mrs. Neal's not perfect. I got a little too excited with this pork chop. Okay? Got a little too thin. So that piece, we'll end up having to cut that off. That's gonna be too thin there, and that's just gonna fall off and that's gonna burn. So we're gonna have to cut that off. This one right here, he flattened out pretty well. Okay? He's nice and thin. It's about the same thickness all the way around. Okay? And so when he gets ready to cook, he should turn out really well. Hopefully. It's the game plan. So, these are nice and flattened. It says, I'm now gonna go ahead and coat each pork chop one at a time with egg, shake off the excess, and then dredge it in cracker crumbs, coating both sides, and then set aside on a plate and season with some black pepper. Once I've done that, I'm gonna go ahead and then cook my pork chops in a skillet. I'll talk more about cooking them in a skillet here in just a moment. I would like to point out, when you continue to read on, once you've cooked your pork chops, it says you're gonna remove them from the heat, remove the skillet from the heat, and then you're not gonna clean your skillet. You're gonna keep this same skillet that you cook your pork chops in and make a little sauce. Okay, and we'll talk more about that here in a little bit. But don't get a new skillet. Don't clean this in between. You want all of the meat drippings and all of that stuff to stay in there. Okay, that'll add extra flavor to your sauce. So, I am gonna go ahead. I've got an egg beaten in one of my pie plates, one of my pie tins. And I've got crackers here I'm gonna crush up. You want these crackers fairly fine. If you don't have them very fine, you're gonna have large chunks of crackers that are just falling off as you're cooking them, okay? I'm just gonna crush these with my hands. All right, if you don't have a pie tin, you are more than welcome to put these in a small bowl or a plate. My recommendation though, you want to make sure that if you're using a bowl, the bowl is going to be as flat as possibly can be. The reason for this is so your pork chops will lay flat and have an even coating. If you have a bowl that's larger, or like not as large, it's kind of small, and your pork chop's not able to lay very flat on it, it's not going to get coated very evenly. Okay, you're gonna have parts of your pork chop that are coated, parts of it that aren't, and it's kind of a mess. Okay, doesn't work very well. So let me get this. Trying to get this crushed up as fine as I can. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and wash my hands real quick. All right, I am gonna go ahead now. I'm gonna coat my pork chops. I'm gonna start off a little bit of egg. Egg here. Getting both sides coated really well. If you want, you're more than welcome to use your hands, which I'm sure I'll probably switch to here in just a moment, because I like to use my hands with things. Lay them in my crackers. This other one started in the egg. Crackers, trying to get it nice and coated best I can. It's not going to be perfect, and that's okay. Like I said, if you need to use more crackers, feel free to use more crackers if you have more crackers at home. Okay, and I'm going to set this off to the side. Egg started over here. Crackers once again. Could probably use a few more crackers. I think I'm gonna call it good though. Try to use the rest of these up. So I'm gonna have one pork chop that'll probably turn out really well and the other one that's not gonna look as pretty. That's okay. Okay, like I said, if you, at this point in time, if you wanted to use more crackers, that would be perfectly acceptable. Okay. Got these nice and coated. Like I said, these bigger chunks here of cracker, they're kind of falling off. So you want to try to get them as fine as you can. Okay. The remainder of your egg and the remainder of your crackers, if you do have any, are just going to go in the trash. Okay, at this point in time, remember our balsamic roasted veggies? They've been marinating for about half an hour. We are gonna go ahead. I have my broiler started. And like I said, I have it on low. And you can see, oh, you can't see right now. The heating element, it's gotten hot from up here at the top. So I'm gonna go ahead, put my balsamic roasted veggies on a baking sheet. And it says they need to broil for about 10 minutes. So I'm gonna go ahead and get them on a lovely little baking sheet here. I have my pork schnitzel ready here. I'm gonna go ahead and get my skillet started. I'm gonna get these in the oven and start pan frying my pork schnitzel while my veggies are cooking. Okay? This is what I'd recommend doing. That way all of your food is ready at the same time. So, head. These nice and spread out. These smell really, really good. Today is Saturday and my husband is currently at the school with me and he made a comment that these smell really, really good. So I'm thinking he's gonna be really excited to taste test these here in a minute. Hands clean. And I'm gonna pop these in the oven. like I said earlier, I'm not as familiar with these ovens here. So rather than setting the timer for 10 minutes, I have it set for 8. The reason being is that I don't want to burn our balsamic roasted veggies. So to make sure that I'm not going to burn them, I have it set for a lower amount of time. That way I can check on them here in just a few to see kind of where they're at and see if they need to be cooked for a little bit longer. So now that I've got those in the oven, I have my skillet started to start heating up on the stovetop for my pork schnitzel. And we are gonna pan fry our pork schnitzel. So like I said, when we pan fry our pork schnitzel, we're gonna have a little bit of oil in our pan, in our skillet. And we're gonna heat that over medium to high heat. Okay, it's really gonna depend on your stovetop and what your stove is, how hot your stove gets. Goodness. So I'm gonna have mine on about medium high heat. And then it says you want to add about a tablespoon of olive oil. Okay, you might need more, you might need less, and I'll explain that to you here in just a minute. If you add too much oil in your skillet, your pork schnitzel, your pork chops, they're just going to absorb all that oil, and your pork chops going to get all oily, your coating's going to fall off, and they're not going to get nice and golden brown like you want them to. When you're heating your skillet as well, if you do not wait for your oil to heat up, your pork chops, once again, they're just going to absorb all the oil, and your pork chops aren't going to get nice and golden brown like you want them to. So, let's see here. Let's see how close I can get you. Nope. Awesome. This is getting nice and warm. I'm going to add roughly a tablespoon of olive oil. Maybe a little bit more. So, this is probably closer to tablespoon and a half, 2 tablespoons. I want just enough in here to kind of coat to cover the bottom of the pan. And when I put my pork chops in here, it's going to be just enough that they are not submerged. It's going to be just enough that they kind of fry at the bottom. As you are cooking your pork chops, you might have to put more oil in the pan. When you do that, you're going to have to wait for the oil to heat up. Okay? This skillet is small, so I'm going to cook 1 pork chop at a time. And in between pork chops, I'm going to have to add more oil to the pan. If you have a larger skillet, you might be able to cook both pork chops at the same time. For individuals that are, for those of you that are new to pan frying or not as familiar with this. Okay, so sorry guys. The battery died on me, so I had to switch batteries. Like I was saying, you want just enough oil in here where when I put my pork chops in, see? I can show you all. When I put my pork chops in, okay, it's going to give them a nice little, it won't fully submerge them. So, go ahead, put 1 in there. Oh, beautiful. We like that sound. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but that's a lovely sizzling sound. Okay. This is roughly how much oil you want in the pan when you're pan frying. So depending on the size of your skillet, the size of your frying pan, you might use a tablespoon, you might use 2. Okay, it's really gonna depend on the size and how many pork chops you're cooking at a time. So right now I just have 1 in here. If I tried to put a second one, yeah, I could make it fit, but that's gonna overcrowd my pan. I'm not gonna have even cooking, and I'm gonna have 1 pork chop that's a little underdone and 1 that's probably burnt, and it's not gonna turn out very well. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cook 1 of these at a time. At this point, the only reason I'm moving this skillet around is because my burner is not very level. That's the only reason I'm moving it around. So I wanna make sure the oil gets on both sides of the pork chop and gets that even cooking. But right now that burner's not very level, that's why I keep moving it. In general, you're gonna let it set. You don't wanna touch this. If you touch this and start flipping it a whole bunch, your saltines, your coating on the outside, it's gonna start absorbing all that oil, and it's not gonna cook very evenly. It's gonna absorb that oil and get all soggy and start to fall off. It's not gonna get nice and brown and crispy like you want it to. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna let it set and wait for a little bit until that edges, right there, start to get the nice golden brown like we want them to. So it's getting pretty close, even right over here. As you guys can tell, I'm gonna tell you what, more than likely you're probably not gonna want to get as close as I am right now. I used to bake bread for a living and put my hands in like 500-degree ovens. So I'm used to, and cooking in the restaurant, I'm used to getting burnt and popped and everything else. But most of you don't want to get your hands that close. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna flip this. Oh, beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. This is not gonna take very long on this side to cook. While this is cooking, my timer went off for my veggies. I'm gonna take a look at my veggies real quick. See kind of where they're at. They're looking pretty good in there. I definitely think they need some more time though. So what I'm gonna do, got this broiler on low. I'm gonna move them around a little bit. Just move them around. Maybe I will. I'll let them continue to cook for another couple minutes. Like I said, I'm not as familiar with this oven, so it might take us a few tries to figure out how long they need to be in there for. So, awesome, awesome. This pork schnitzel is looking really, really good, guys. I'm telling you, my husband is here. He's gonna be super excited when I get this done for him. Okay. This side's not quite done. I'm gonna give it another couple minutes. As you can see, ideally you're gonna have this wonderful brown coating, this wonderful brown color on both sides. The pork right here you can see is white and clearly done. Juices should run clear. Pork, typically you would take a thermometer to test the temperature to make sure that it's done, and you want it to be around 145 degrees Fahrenheit. However, this pork chop is so thin that if you put a thermometer in here, it's gonna go straight through, okay? So the best way to determine doneness is by the color and the appearance, okay? Ideally, if you cut your pork chop thin enough, it should look just like this. All right, it should look just like this. Should just look nice and white. Like I said, we're gonna go ahead, do my best. Oh, that side's perfect. I put this on a lovely little plate here. I still have plenty of oil in this pan. I might, you know what, I'm gonna put just a hair more oil in there to make sure I've got enough that will cover my second pork chop here. I'm gonna let that heat up. This oil should not take nearly as long as the last batch did. Just gonna go ahead. Yep, you hear that lovely little sizzle. Hear that sizzle, see those bubbles? That's what you want, okay? You want that sizzle, you want those bubbles. That tells you that oil's nice and hot and ready to go. If there is a lot of sizzling, if there's a lot of bubbles, if there's smoke coming up, your oil's too hot. And what you'll have to do is that you're gonna have to let it cool down before you can use it. If you don't let it cool down, you're gonna have burnt pork chops where the outside is really, really done and it's all charred and the inside's raw, okay? And it's not gonna cook evenly. So this is looking really, really good, ladies and gentlemen. Pretty excited to see how this turns out. So I'm gonna go ahead and continue letting this one cook. timer's going off again. I'm gonna check those veggies. Okay, let's take a look at these. Awesome. Okay, these veggies to me, ooh, can you guys see that steam? These veggies, okay, these to me, those are perfect for me. Okay, perfect. If you wanted to, you could cook these a little bit longer so you can get a nice char around the edges. As you can see, a couple of our mushrooms started to get a little charred, which is awesome. If I was using my broiler at home, it probably would have had a better char on it, but unfortunately the broiler here, I'm not as familiar with. If I did the high broil instead of the low broil, that probably would have helped with that charredness. But these veggies should have a wonderful balsamic flavor profile and should pair really nicely with our pork schnitzel. The reason I say that is that this balsamic flavor, the balsamic marinade on these, that balsamic flavor is gonna pair really well with the sauce on our pork schnitzel. So as I mentioned, our pork is still cooking over there. Second one's still cooking. Got the first one done. Here in a minute, I'm gonna remove that pork chop from the heat, okay? Both sides should take about a minute or two. We are then, we're gonna remove the skillet from the heat, but we're gonna leave all the little meat drippings, all of that fond is what that's called, all those little drippings there in the pan, and we are gonna add to it some butter, some lemon juice, some chicken broth, and garlic, and scrape off, there we go, and scrape off all that little fond on the bottom and create a lovely little sauce that's gonna go on top of those pork chops. So we're gonna have this great acidic balsamic flavor that's kind of got some sweetness to it on our veggies. It's gonna pair really nicely with this lemony sauce that's gonna go on our pork chops. So let's go ahead, see where we're at with everything. So one side here, really, really nice. Oh, that side can maybe use a hair longer, but for the most part, that's good to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut the heat. Take that off here in just a second. Make sure to hold the handle of the skillet as I do this. Awesome. I'm gonna remove this from the heat. Add my 2 tablespoons of chicken broth, my garlic, my butter, everything to, goodness, my butter is getting all over the place right now. Make a lovely little sauce. Part of the reason we want to take this off the heat is because if this pan is still really, really hot when we do this, all this is going to evaporate really quickly. And we're not going to get all of that lovely flavor from those meat drippings, that fond at the bottom of your pan. That's what that's called. It's called fond. Juice of half a lemon. I'm putting my hand underneath here to catch any potential lemon seeds. I don't have any lemon seeds in my sauce. And it looks like I actually don't have any, which is awesome. Okay, I'm gonna put this back on the heat See what this looks like right now. I'm gonna let this reduce down. So, put this on kind of just a low to medium heat. It smells really good right now, guys. Get an idea of what our pork chops look like. I said I'm gonna let this reduce down. Scraping that fond off there. I'm telling you that this is, I'm pretty excited to eat this. I've not had this in a while. This is a recipe that I've had other students previously make, and what ends up happening is a lot of students tend to really like this dish. So, a lot of students tend to really like this dish. The only thing that they're maybe not a fan of is that some of them aren't always a fan of the lemon juice. It's too acidic for them. It's too lemony for them. So what you might do, you might try to put the sauce on the side. If you're not sure how you're gonna feel about it, I would try putting the sauce on the side at first. So I'd go ahead and try your pork schnitzel without the sauce, and then put it on after the fact, and see, kind of get an idea if you like the flavor or not. The other thing that people tend to have issues with is that they put way too much sauce on it, and they just kind of like drown their pork schnitzel in sauce. This is supposed to be just a nice little pairing on top. I will warn you, if you don't plan on eating your pork schnitzel right away, if it's gonna set for a minute, don't put the sauce on immediately. If you put that sauce on immediately, your pork schnitzel is gonna absorb all of that and it's gonna get soggy. Okay, you're not gonna get that lovely crispy pork chop that you just prepared. It's gonna be soggy instead. So, for the most part, a lot of students really like this dish. The only thing, like I said, that they may not be a fan of is the sauce. And I've had several students tell me that after they've made this in class, they've turned around and made it again at home, and they just leave the sauce off. And that's perfectly fine. There's all sorts of other sauces that you could potentially put on this instead if you didn't like that lemon flavor, okay? Or you can make the sauce without the lemon flavor and add extra chicken broth to it, or add extra butter or something else if you don't like that acidicness. My goodness. Just like I said, get this nice and reduced down. Looking really, really great over here. And we are just about done. Heat on this. A little bit on top here. Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. I'll let you all take a look at this. Okay. And now you have a great, lovely dish for your whole family to enjoy. So with this recipe, you get to practice two techniques, your pan frying and your broiling techniques. And hopefully you guys enjoy this as much as some of my previous students have, and as much as I do.